Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I want to talk specifically about Dungeons and Dragons and a type of Dungeons and Dragons participant. So this one's going to be a little surprising. So I have So let me tell you the participant type right now. A Noppo, Noppo, a Noppo, a sorry, Noppo, capital Noppo, Noppo. And what is this type of Dungeons and Dragons participant? It's a participant in Dungeons and Dragons who does not dungeon master, does not play as a dungeon performer, um, or a Dungeons and Dragons a dungeon performer, someone who plays a player character at a Dungeons and Dragons table. They are neither one of those. So how are they participating in Dungeons and Dragons? They participate in Dungeons and Dragons by aiding its name recognition, right? So when would this happen? Well, probably once, twice a year, somebody will say, "Oh, do you play Dungeons and Dragons?" to them, right? And that could be a dungeon master or a dungeon performer, or just someone discussing Chris Pine's career, right? And they'll say, "Oh, no, I don't play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not a nerd." Noppo, nerd opposition. They don't participate. They don't play. They don't do Dungeons and Dragons, right? But they very carefully, despite their attempt, maintain Dungeons and Dragons' name recognition, right? This is really important. Okay, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Why Dungeons and Dragons wins and the OSR and the indie fail constantly every single attempt they make, right, is because of name recognition. Dungeons and Dragons is the only tabletop role-playing game in the world that has name recognition beyond the tabletop role-playing game community, and it's not a little bit; it's a lot. This year, I'm sorry, 2023, last year, the Dungeons and Dragons blockbuster outsold a Marvel blockbuster. Okay, Dungeons and Dragons, the Dungeons and Dragons movie had a bigger box office, 207 million, than the Marvels, 205 million. Global. That's astounding, right? And the reality is that was a global release, right? Global release, and it was one of the top performing films of the year. That is truly incredible. And that film, that did not do well because it didn't do well because of Dungeons and Dragons players. Dungeons and Dragons player base is like 10 million people, 15 million if we're lucky, right? That is absolutely not enough to power a blockbuster. People who actually know the Dungeons and Dragons name from 5 decades of controversy, and that's where they know it from. Um, you know, that's why it's still there, right? So it is truly astounding, truly astounding, right? So, um, so basic and so a Dungeons and Dragons participant is a Noppo, right? A Noppo is a Dungeons and Dragons participant, and they're trying to like brush Dungeons and Dragons off, like I'm too cool for school. I don't play Dungeons and Dragons, right? But at the same time, they're saying, "Oh no, I don't play Dungeons and Dragons," and that's a big deal because they're not like Dungeons and what now, right? They're not saying that, right? They're saying, "I know exactly what you're talking about," and you can't apply that to me because I'm not a nerd, right? Now let's talk just a little tiny bit about that part. So first of all, this type of person, we need to talk about them and we need to acknowledge them, right? So one, people there like I see this all the time. I love board games so much, right? And I'll go to church, right? And people will be like, "Oh, what are you doing this afternoon?" And I'll say, "Oh, well, every Sunday afternoon we have a board game meeting we have a board game group that comes to our house. We board game." And you could and some people will be like, "Oh, that's," they'll have a delightful smile. They're like, "That's great." And then other people will be like, "Oh, yeah," they're like, "You sit around and play board games?" And not because they're not going to play the board games we like they literally don't play board games. There are many people who tabletop games are it is unthinkable for them to do. They're like, I would never do that in my life. And one of the reasons why is there's this thing about and this comes from the 80s. It's not true at all anymore, right? Where this idea that nerds can't date. And this was very true in the 80s, right? In the 80s, like people were spraying their hair with, hair curler that could, with chemicals that could light on fire and they would die, but they wanted a date so bad. They had to have that big mall hair. And the reality is, the nerds were like, nah, man, like we're gonna spend just like they showed in Stranger Things, we're gonna spend 10 hours on a Saturday, and we're not dating, right? Like that has completely changed, and I think the reason why is nerd is no longer a functioning word today. It doesn't really have any definition. It doesn't really apply to anyone. But the tradition of it is powerful, and it still lives in the hearts and minds of many. And to them, Dungeons and Dragons is the pinnacle of nerd culture, right? And they want to be attractive to the opposite. They want to be attractive to someone. That's changed too. They want to be attractive to people, to paramours, to suitors, right? And they're like, no, no paramour or no suitor is attracted to a nerd. Now that's 100% false today, but they're coming from the 80s and the 90s. And get this, it's every generation, right? It's all the way down to, like the millennial generation. They weren't born in the 80s, but that tradition has literally been taught to them in today's society. That just think about an Instagram model. And there are no Instagram models who play Dungeons and Dragons, right? Because it's still that 80s clutch, of nerd, the badge of nerd culture, which many of us, which isn't even real, but it is. I guess I really think nerd has no functioning today. And the reason why is nerd really kind of means myopic focus on something, on fantasy or science fiction that is niche, and those people can earn money a lot because of the tech, because of the tech industry. The tech industry has made it so that these people can earn quite a bit, and nothing attracts people more, a paramour or a suitor, than nothing attracts than money, right? So nerds can get dates today, but it is extremely real that people think that. So that is, and I want to thank you for your patience there. I know that was a lot of talk about the word nerd, but I feel like, but to be very clear, their opposition does serve Dungeons and Dragons, and they are participating in Dungeons and Dragons. How are they participating in? Well, one of the things is they are saying it's forbidden, all right? And for them, it is forbidden, and they're saying, if you're going to, here you go. Like there's a book called The Rules. Like there's these dating rules, right? And for that, you don't text, but if somebody texts you and you want to get another date with them, you don't text until the next day because you're too busy, right? And they'll literally read your text and be like, okay, I have to put a 24-hour wait time on this and play. Everybody who plays by those rules, none of them are ever going to play Dungeons and Dragons, right? But for others who are like, oh, I'd like to have whatever hobby I want. I don't want to be trapped by this weird, image of myself and not be able to have a hobby because it's antithesis to dating. I want to date and do whatever the heck I want. So independent people, those people, the Noppos, are really participating in Dungeons and Dragons by putting the hot sauce on the taco. They are forbidding Dungeons and Dragons. And that's very interesting, right? And we're going to get to another, and you're like, well, wait a second, does everybody who forbids Dungeons and Dragons, are they helping Dungeons and Dragons? We'll get there. We're not going to talk about it in this one, but we'll talk about a different type of participant. But they are really and boy, oh boy, man, you learn as a parent. I'm a parent. I got 4 kids, right? And I learned, right? And all my kids were like, for every single one of my kids, I was like, I want you to play exactly 0 video games. You know how I accomplished them? By buying them every video game they asked for. There is nothing that puts the hot sauce on the taco more than forbidding something. Right? I knew if I wanted my kids to not play video games, I needed to give them books that were better than the video games they were reading. I needed to take them outside on adventures. I needed to engage them in ways that were far beyond you can't have video games, because I knew if I said you can't have video games, they would do nothing but, they would pursue them. And so these Noppos are very real, right? Like, they are putting the hot sauce on the taco because there are many, many groups that oppose Dungeons and Dragons for many, many reasons. Noppos are just one. But their participation in Dungeons and Dragons is very real and very productive. I know that sounds antithesis. It sounds like an opposite idea, and it is, right? Like, how could somebody who opposes something make that thing attractive and engage people? But that, boy, oh boy, is that exactly what it does. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.